Hello, nice to be here. Nice to have this talk today after morning sessions. So many topics that I'm going to mention will fit well with previous talks about extinction, about hidden things, hidden connections in nature, and also how to change our thinking, how to change our imaginary. And as you all know, we are currently in the middle of a global ecological crisis, and this crisis practically influences each and every animal in the earth. There are many changes. There are overfishing, overhunting, also mediated changes like diminishing habitats, climate warming, changes in ecosystems, and so forth. So my question is that how species itself, how animals themselves may experience such processes, how animals experience extinction. And well, probably for a start, we can think of many kind of changes that are going on in the worlds of animal species that are going extinct. When the number of individuals becomes lower, there are less and less contact between individual animals, so there's less communication, probably kind of social deprivation. Also, we can consider, and I started to think about while listening Avelina's talk in the morning, that given the extent how much human agricultural landscapes take over, there are probably also a lot of hunger, a lot of lack of resources for our species. And we can also consider that taking into account our human effects to the environment, the natural environment and ecosystems are going increasingly weird or unusual for natural species. So many animals are living in a world that is increasingly unstable and difficult to understand for them. So while looking this animal extinction from the kind of individual perspective of an animal, so why to do that? On one hand, probably it helps us to grow empathy, to understand better what sort of emotions or feelings or stages our species are going through. But it also may help us to perhaps mitigate this mass extinction, or at least try to address that and provide also some solutions, some tools that are related with animals' own perspective and own feeling in regard to extinction. Now, for taking this approach, we will probably need some tools, and the tool that I'm using here comes from Baltic German biologist Jakob von Uexküll, and is called Umwelt theory or Umwelt concept. And well, in very simple terms, Jakob von Uexküll's Umwelt concept can be considered as a kind of bubble, soap bubble in which an animal lives and through which this animal perceives the surrounding world. So each and every animal species are living in their own kind of subjective world and experience the surrounding ecosystems through this meaning bubble. In more precise terms, Umwelt can be described as a part of the environment that an animal subject selects with its species-specific sense organs according to its organization and biological needs, and every subject is a constructor of its umwelt or a creator of its umwelt. And this is a definition that comes from Jakob von Uexküll's son, Ture von Uexküll. Each umwelt also is related with the surrounding environment or ecosystem through relations. And there are like two types of relations. There are relations that are based on perception, on sensing the world, and there are relations that are based on acting or behaving towards the world. And what is, I think, relevant here that both this perception and acting both are based on meaning or related to the meaningful connections. And there are many different types of relations. Some have to do with food, some have to do with enemies, some have to do with partners, and so on. So that's a way how animal creates the meaningful interactions with the surrounding ecosystem. Jakob von Uexküll himself has written quite a lot about this umwelt theory, and also people who have came later and developed his work. So there are different ways of how to interpret this umwelt idea. Some claim that umwelt can be considered as an animal model of the surrounding world. So that's a way how animal models or understands what is going on in the surrounding. Some others, more related with phenomenological school, would say that it is about animals' phenomenal presence in the world, or animals' kind of subjective experience, how it felt to be in the world. I'm here while thinking about extinction and endangerment. I'm more interested about like kind of ecological or ecosemiotic interpretation. And here ecosemiotics is a part of semiotics that studies sign relations, communication, meaning relations between animals and an ecosystem, and semiotic relations in ecosystem, including humans. And here, what comes into spotlight is the kind of meaning connections between different species and between a species and the surrounding environment. So actually, in Uexküll's own work, also this kind of meaning connections between different animals and between an animal and environment are quite present. And he often talks about them in musical terms. So he uses concepts of tone and point and counterpoint and harmony and the polyphonic choir, really to emphasize that there is this kind of correspondences, kind of fittings between different animals and between an animal and the environment. And there is very reason why he uses a musical language, because music is about like qualities, about qualitative relations, and so these correspondences, they are not about numbers, about counting, but they are about kind of feeling of how to fit into environment. So from ecosemiotic viewpoint, we can talk about umwelt as a sum of structural correspondences between animals' subjective experience, how animal is in the environment, surrounding ecosystem, the structures of ecosystem, the rhythms and patterns of ecosystem, and also about animals' own physiology, its body, its kind of bodily construction in the environment, and then what animal does, how it behaves, how it acts in the surrounding. So how these four components are related to one another, how they fit into one another, what are kind of meaningful connections there. And in such environmental conditions where species have evolved or developed for a long time, these four components, they correspond relatively well to one another. But now, during the ecological crisis and within the environmental change, these connections may become unreliable and may break down. To understand the effects of ecological crisis to the animal, we probably need to look a bit the role of ecosystem in relation to animal umwelt. And well, in contrast to what is usually considered, ecosystem is not just a place where an animal lives in, it's not just a living place, and it's also not just the kind of connection of matter and energy flows. But the ecosystem here is more like a complex set of connections, feedback loops, sign relations, recognition, communication, kind of hidden network between different species. And this means that this ecosystem as a hidden network of correspondences, it also has a certain capacity of understanding itself and of describing itself. So ecosystem memorizes. Ecosystem has a memory. And this idea, I have found it from a system ecologist, Bernard Patten, who is talking about ecosystem as a model-making, complex, adaptive system. And the idea here basically is that ecosystem is kind of distributed, shared, a memory network that is capable of memorizing itself and also each and every animal that is living in that. And I think I can make reference here to Avelina's talk in the morning, when Avelina was talking about plants that memorize large herbivores that have been extinct for a very long time. So this kind of coevolutionary relations are a part of this memory. And in more traditional ecology, also the concept of ecological memory is used as the idea that there are some past stages or past experiences that influence the present or future stages in ecological community. A very nice illustration here is the concept of umwelt reversion that have been developed by my good colleagues Nelli Mäekivi and Riin Magnus. And they have used this concept to describe the changes of life habits in European mink, that is an endangered species in Estonia, as you may know. And there was a release program. So after several generations being raised and bred in zoological garden, these animals were released to the Estonian islands, to Hiiumaa and more recently in Saaremaa. And what happened was that their diet, their kind of behavior, the way how they reacted to, well, humans and other, dangerous species, it slowly kind of reverted back to the more original, more ancient way of how minks live in their kind of natural environments. So we can interpret that there was some semiotic or informational correspondences between these animals and their surrounding environment. There's this ecological memory that helped animals to reach to the earlier stages of their umwelts. So there was kind of umwelt reversion. Now, perhaps one way of thinking about this is to make a difference between the kind of short-term and long-term processes in animal umwelts. So we can talk about really kind of well settled and static aspects of umwelt, which both have to do with animal physiology, but also have to do with the environment, the kind of global climatic rhythms, for instance, geographic structures, and so forth. And then there are more short-term or mediated layers or aspects of the umwelt that have to do more with cognition, learning, how animal relates to the environment in given specific circumstances, and also on the behalf of the ecosystem, there are different properties, different resources, different patterns that this given ecosystem provides to the animal. So this mediated umwelt, we can call this short-term layer as such, helps in a certain degree to really come over or also solve the problems, because animal is capable of adapting and learning how to find his kind of way of living in the changing environment. But there are certain boundaries to what extent this kind of compensation is possible. And we can see that if these like core structures, really climatic rhythms and seasonal rhythm change, then an animal really is in much trouble. And as an example here, we can think about seals, ring seal, who is very adapted for a life in Arctic oceans. So they keep open their breeding holes by using the special sharp front claws that are developed for that. They also build layers from snow for giving birth to and nursing their pups. And they are changing fur once in a year, and they need really ice sheets for doing that. So there needs to be kind of large territories filled with ice. And if this kind of points and counterpoints relations or correspondences change or well, dissolve because of climate change, then the seals are in much trouble. So now, from this umwelt perspective, extinction and endangerment can be interpreted as taking place within animal umwelt in the conditions of rapid environmental change. There are many processes that make it difficult for animals to sustain their umwelt structure, like irregularities in the temporal and spatial patterns of ecosystem, errors in ecological codes, human-induced noise, and other disturbances. So basically, we can talk here about umwelt collapse as a kind of disintegration of animal umwelt, resulting from errors in semiotic processes that mediate between an animal and an ecosystem. And here again, ecologists have proposed the concept of niche collapse that they have described in relation to the extinction of one lizard species. And what happens here is that this is a lizard. What happens here is that the lizard is very much afraid of predation and starts to avoid open areas, open landscapes in these small Caribbean islands, And as a result of that, it's not capable of finding good habitats for feeding and for propagating. So there's something that goes wrong in its niche. It's not capable of really kind of handling its subjective world structure anymore. So there are probably like different ways of how this umwelt collapse can take place. And I think a first option, first property, possibility is exactly that there are these different biological needs or different functional cycles that an animal needs to fulfill. It needs to find mate, it needs to find food, it needs to be safe from predators, it needs to have habitat, it needs to have like social relations and so forth. And if something happens in the environment in the way that one functional cycle, one biological need somehow blocks the other, then really we can think about this extinction as a result of something that goes wrong in an animal umwelt structure. Another possibility is that animals often are using environmental codes or some indicators, some marks, some signs from the environment to help them in their living activities. So they may use, for instance, some landmarks to orient or to navigate, or also in their communication they may do reference to something that is in the environment. One well-known example here is that, for instance, bees, when they are communicating with one another in the beehive about some sources of nectar or pollen in nearby fields, then they are doing this by the kind of specific movements which are called bee dance language. And this dance language, it has one reference to the position of the sun. So, and now if sun moves in the sky during the day, also the meaning of this dance code moves. So it indicates a different point in the environment. And the position of the sun is relatively stable, so it kind of moves each and every day in the same way, so it's a good, stable code. But we can think of other instances where, because of environmental change, these reference systems go wrong. So for instance, a lot of sea animals, well, fish, but also sea mammals, they are using water currents as a reference system to navigate in oceans. And now when these water currents, when they are changing because of climate change, then again, the species, they do not reach to the destinations where they want to go, but they end up somewhere lost. And the third option that I can provide here has to do with a kind of general stress that is caused by climate change or other human-made environmental changes. And just because of this stress level, it's difficult to organize this internal meaning connections, a structure of perceived world, this umwelt structure. And an example here, I think, could be bee diseases or bee colony collapse disorder, which means that in certain point, bees, honeybees, they are not returning to hive anymore, but they just randomly fly off and disappear. And then this is a really problematic thing for a bee industry, then this has been studied quite a lot. And it seems that there is no any single reason or any single good source for this bee colony collapse. But there are many multiple factors that contribute to that. And from semiotic perspective, from umwelt perspective, we could interpret that just the general stress level rises so much that bees are not capable of organizing themselves anymore in this situation. And also what kind of supports this is that if there are few stressors, then bees are able to still operate, function well. But if this number goes too large, then they get lost. Now I reach here to the conclusion, and I think what Umwelt perspective can give us is that an animal species, each and every animal species going extinct in the environment, this is the end of one world, because each Umwelt is a unique model of the world, unique way of living, unique way of understanding and relating with the world. And also extinction in this sense has been related with the decrease of imagination and experience, just in this context that each animal lives its own unique way, perceives the world in its own unique way, and if the species is extinct, then this specific imagination about the world is lost. So I think this kind of approach to distinguish between, for instance, core and mediated umwelt, and because between different causes of umwelt collapse, may also perhaps help to really address and respond to extinction, because we may have an additional kind of aspect of how this extinction happens and why animal species are going lost. But also it may help us perhaps to draft and figure out some countermeasures by paying more attention and making more emphasis to animals' own subjective perspective. And now in the end, I would like to broaden this perhaps a bit to this kind of environmentalist and ecological thinking in the common sense. And I would say that using energy and kind of consuming energy, consuming matter that we humans are often doing, because definitely we are using too much energy and consume too much, this is something that puts our species into danger, because this excessive use mixed up and kind of changes this ecological patterns and these core umwelts, core structures that they need to kind of act and function well. But at the same time, when we work more with meanings and communication and try to create the correspondences, try to make more meaning in the world, then this may be the way to help our species to adapt and to really survive in this difficult era. And this may also have very practical outcomes and very practical results, as working with kind of artistic designs, working with environmental designs, trying to reach to the solutions that would be meaningful to other species and would help them to really fulfill these basic life needs that they have in their umwelt. So yes, I think that this working with meanings and kind of trying to negotiate, trying to understand our species also in relation with species extinction and environmental change, this semiotic potential can be a way to mitigate and way to really work against the current mass extinction. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you so much for letting us take a look of your Umwelt and definitely enriching our Umwelt with that. Now we have time for questions, comments, ideas. You take a look whether there are any in Slido. And also, I think we have still the microphone somewhere. Where is the mic, actually? Ah, okay, there, thank you. So, okay, there is.
Yeah, thank you. You talked about a lot of this adapting with the changes. Could it be that changes also are developing, not the right word, but developing the intelligence of the animals? Is the adaptation and intelligence somehow related?
Mm-hmm. Thanks. I think that that's one thing that we humans are definitely doing is that we are changing the world more chaotic and more unexpected and more kind of, difficult to grasp. Then in this sense, to survive, yes, these species that are kind of cohabiting with us and who are, either living in urban environments or close to us, they need somehow to keep track with this world becoming more unexpected. And yes, we may think that in this sense, human activities in the world, the way we change the world, also speedens up this development of cognitive features of our species. But there is a problem, and the problem is that the species that are more successful of living with humans are kind of generalists. And so it's a specific group of species who have not adapted to specific environmental circumstances, conditions, but who were able to really get along with a lot of different environments, feed on many different objects, and so forth. So we are also kind of supporting involuntarily the specific ecological traits in the sense that you become more generalist, you become more omnivorous, for instance, and so forth.
Yes, please.
Well, you told us that this Umwelt is a way to make meaning, to make the relations with the outside world meaningful for a species in a cognitive way and also in a semiotic, biosemiotic way. So it means that a species lives a good life when he is able to to establish all those meaningful connections with the outside world, with his Umwelt. And then, of course, it means that this species is in a way aware of its umwelt, and that this meaning is something that in a way he can also communicate to, or via this meaning making process he can communicate to other members of the species and possibly to other species around it. And then, well, if the conditions change, then some problems arise. It cannot make its life meaningful anymore, and but still there remains this aspect that most probably the members of the species, they are aware that they are in a problematic situation, that this lack of meaning, somehow they become, let's say, conscious of it. And then, well, it just, this hypothesis arises that would it be possible if scientists analyze all those conditions that endanger the life of the species, and they are going to, well, invent possible solutions. But would it also be possible that at a certain step scientists could, well, ask for the species themselves what are their main problems, what is most difficult for them, so that they could relate in a meaningful manner to the species and, well, tell us something. Why are you so sad, and why are you becoming extinct, and so on. Tell us what we should do first.
Thank you for this very nice kind of development of thought. I was waiting where are you reaching with that. Well, yes and no. Yes and no, in the sense that quite probably other species are not able to communicate us in this way what is wrong with them, and there are different reasons for that. One kind of direction where I can go is that there are meanings in different layer and at different complexity, and some are cognitive understandings, as we humans have very clearly, so we can kind of tell of what we have and how we relate with the world and what we are lacking, whereas other meanings can be more preconscious and kind of bodily meanings and bodily feelings. So something is not fitting. Something either supports in the environment your way of being or kind of dissupports. So there may be too little or too much, something like temperature, for instance. Or just some feeling that something is lacking, but you are not aware of communicating what it is that is lacking. But at the same time, I think from the different level, we humans, we often also try to understand animals in these ways, to describe them scientifically in ecology, or to map their kind of umwelt structures, what sort of necessities, what sort of needs they have, how they relate with the environment by specific correspondences, but also artistically and aesthetically. So how it is to be a member of specific species, and how to look environment from the different eyes or different perceptual organs. So these are all different ways of addressing this presence of other species. So to put it shortly, I think that kind of we cannot have this kind of correspondence that we really ask and they tell us why they are going extinct, but there are some like mediated and kind of indirect ways of addressing and having knowledge of this.
Yes, but then it seems to me that it's very similar to the therapeutic situation. A human being comes to a psychologist and he or she really doesn't know what's the problem. It's somewhat preconscious or unconscious, really hidden, and then they start working together and making out what the problem might be. Maybe they never really reach the core, but they reach something. And would it be possible to cooperate with animals like that in a therapeutic way?
Mm-hmm. I like this idea of impartial and not final understanding here. So I think also when working with like Umwelt theory, we never have this feeling of how it would be to live like a bat, but we could have some understanding of what bats may perceive and what they are definitely not perceiving in the world.
Actually, we have one question. So I take one question from online, and Caroline asks, first she thanks you, and then she asks, can you say a little more about the human Umwelt? Maybe it will be too long, but...
What I can say here is that while thinking about other species and while trying to also use the Umwelt theory to understand other species, it's very important to understand like our position as humans, because we are also living in our Umwelt and we are not neutral in regard to like surrounding environment. So we are bipedal, we have a specific height of our eyes from where we look the environment. We have binocular, very good color vision. At the same time, some other senses like smelling is extremely bad compared to like pets, for instance, and so forth. So again, I mean, when trying to use this Umwelt theory and perhaps also as a kind of creative mean to know our species, it's also important to kind of have this description of ourselves. Where are these blind spots that we are not capable of perceiving because we take them as self-evident. But of course, if really going to the description of human Umwelt, it would be a very long discussion.
It's a really good answer. Kalevi, your question or idea?
Thank you very much. This is a very interesting approach also to add something to ecological view on the approach on extinction. But Jakob von Uexküll, as you told us, described Umwelt also using aesthetic terms, music, melody. Now, wouldn't it be nice also to describe the collapse, Umwelt collapse, in aesthetic terms in order to make it better understandable? Like what is, let's say, harmonious turns to be disharmonious, what is melody turns into noise, and say the collapse in that sense would mean just decrease, real crash with in aesthetic aspect of life, of other organisms.
Yeah. Thank you. I like this idea very much, and for two reasons. I think that like thinking about extinction in like aesthetic terms helps us to better kind of understand and relate with the process, also in like Umwelt collapse. But also I